So in this session, we're going to look at percentages. So first we're going to start by looking at percentages of amounts. So there's some basic percentages that we can find without doing very much working out. So for example, we can calculate 50% of something because it's just half, so we divide by 2. 25% would be a further half of that. 10% of something, we would divide by 10. So these are the basic ones that we can find really easily. So let's look at an example. So if I begin with 400 and I want to find 50% of this, I'm going to half it to get 200. If I then want to find 25%, I'll half it again to get 100. Starting again with 400, if I want to find 10%, I'm going to divide by 10 to get 40. If I were to half that, half of 10% is 5%. Half of 40 is 20, so 5% of 400 would be 20. I can also find 1% if I do 10% divided by 10. So 40 divided by 10 is 4. So let's look at an example of finding a percentage of an amount. So here we have 30% of 80. So 30% of 80 I can find by looking for my simple percentages. I can really easily find 10%. So 10% of 80 would be 80 divided by 10, which is 8. I can then make 30% by using these values again. So 10 and 10 again. So 10% is 8, and another 10% is 8. Add all those three together, gives me that 30% is 24. Let's look at another example. Let's find 85% of 80. I can use the percentages that I know. So I know how to find 10%. It's 8. Now from here, I can also find 5% because I can just half it. So 5% would be 4. I can now make 85% out of a combination of these two. I need 8 lots of 10% to give me 80%, and then I need 1 lot of the 5%. So altogether that would give me 85. So 8 times 8 is 64. Add on the 4, gives me a total of 68. So now I'm going to show you a different method to find the percentage of an amount. The method I've just shown you is really good for if you don't have a calculator. So if it comes up on the non-calculator part of your exam, then you need to work out the percentages this way by using the simple ones that we know how to calculate. If it comes up on your calculator part of the test, then you can do it a much quicker and easier way by using what's called a multiplier. For example, 72% of 80. I can calculate 72% of anything by just converting it to a decimal. And this is what's called the multiplier. So to make it a decimal, I need to divide by 100. 72 divided by 100 is 0.72. This is known as your multiplier. To work this out then, I just need to do 0.72, my multiplier, times by 80, and that will give me what 72% of 80 is. Working that out, I get that it's 57.6. So you can find any percentage of an amount just by converting it to a decimal, by dividing by 100. The next part of the video is going to talk about writing something as a percentage of another. So for example, if I've got a bag of sweets, there's 35 sweets in there, 4 of them are orange, and I want to write this as a percentage. So how many orange ones are in the bag? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take note of my important information. So I've got 4 orange sweets and I've got 35 in total. So I can write this as a fraction, 4 out of 35. In order to then make it a percentage, I just need to work that out in the calculator. 4 divided by 35 and then multiply by 100. If I put that in the calculator, I get 11.4%. And that is written as a percentage of something else. So orange sweets in relation to the total number of sweets is 11.4%. So let's look at another example of those. In this one, we're talking about interest in a bank. So somebody puts some money in a bank, £32. They gain 80 pence interest. Let's work out what percentage interest that actually is. So first of all, I get 80 pence interest, and I've got £30 in the bank in total. But the difference with this example is that my units are different, so I'd quite like them to be the same. So to avoid using decimals in there, I'm going to convert them both to pence. So I've got 80 pence on the top of my fraction, over the total, 3,200 pence. That's just £32 in pence. All I'm going to do then is work that out on the calculator and times it by 100. When I work that out on the calculator, I get 2.5%. So 80 pence interest out of £32 in total is actually a 2.5% increase. Up next, it's percentage change. So for example, they might give you an amount that something costs beforehand and then amount that it is now that the prices have increased. And you might need to find the percentage of which they have increased. This is called percentage change. It can also be a decrease. There is a formula for this. So percentage change always equals the change over the original times by 100. For example, if I had a printer that first cost £80 and the price has now increased to 100, that means it's changed by £20. So my change in this case would be 20. My original, the price that the printer was first, was £80. So I put that on the bottom. So I've got 20 over 80 times by 100. When I work this out in the calculator, I get 25%. So that's how much the cost of the printer has increased. So let's look at another example. This time, the cost of a car has decreased. It started out at £35,500 and it's now decreased to £34,000. So my change in price is £1,500. So that goes on the top of my fraction. The original price is the £35,500 that it started out at, times by 100, and my answer is 4.2%. So now let's look at percentage increase and decrease. There are multiple ways of doing this. You could just find the percentage that it needs to be increased by and add it on, or if it's decreased, take it off. Or you could use a multiplier. This is the quicker way of doing it, and it will link onto one of my other videos that talks about interest. So this is the way I'm going to show you. For example, if I'd like to increase 30 by 4%. So I'm starting out with 30, and I'd like to increase it by 4%. I'm going to think of my starting amount, 30, as 100%, and I'm increasing it by 4%. So if I add that on, I've now got 104%. So what I actually want to find is 104% of 30. That's the equivalent of increasing it by 4%. So I'm going to use my multipliers that we talked about earlier. I'm going to convert it to a decimal. So 104 as a decimal is 1.04. So to find 104% of 30, I'm just going to do 1.04 times 30, and I get 31.2 as my answer. So I have now increased this by 4%. So let's do a decrease, for example. This time I'm starting with 670, and I'd like to decrease it by 25%. So I'm thinking of my 670 as 100%. And I'm decreasing it by 25, so I'm taking that away, which leaves me with 75%. So what I actually need to find is 75% of 670. So I'm going to use my multiplier. 75% as a decimal is 0.75, times by 670, which gives me 502.5. So I've now decreased this by 25%. So the final thing we need to look at is reverse percentages. So this is where they might give you the new price of an item and tell you how much it's been increased, but they don't tell you the original amount. So you've got to work backwards to find this. For example, something has been increased by 30%. and it now costs £195. I need to work backwards to find the original amount. So I'm going to now say that if it's been increased by 30%, that's now 130%. And that is represented by £195. Because I know what 130% is, I can find what 1% is by dividing by 130. So if I divide 195 by 130, I get 1.5. So 1% is 1.5. I can then find out what 100% is, because I need to times by 100. So multiplying by 100, 100% is therefore £150. So there's your original amount. So let's do one more example. In this one, a camera costs £180 in a 10% sale. So it costs £180 and it's been reduced by 10% in the sale. So what was the original amount? So if my original amount represents 100%, taking 10% off means it's 90%. So £180 in this case represents 90%. So let's find out what 1% is by dividing by 90. So 180 divided by 90 is £2. So 1% is £2. I can then find out what 100% is by timesing by 100, which is £200.